to cloud. Thank you, computer voice. And on that note, let me introduce the master of ceremonies, Simon. Simon, over to you.
Thank you, Nikita, and welcome everyone. And in case you missed Nikita's comment earlier, yes, kudos for joining another Zoom call at the end of the day where you should be having a cup of tea and popping on your slippers. So thank you so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure actually to see so many people sign up, because it's a reflection on the interest in this field, and I think in the interest in being able to change into this field and evolve our own careers as we progress through them. They don't have to be linear, it doesn't have to be a straight line, and I think that's the beauty of occupational psychology, or indeed psychology as a field. So my name's Simon. Please do feel free to pop your LinkedIn profiles in the chat function. Absolutely link up with everyone that you can on this call. It's always good to make friends, contacts. Everyone I think that you may come into contact with, be very happy to help each other because we're part of a community. So I imagine that I may be in a similar boat to many of you, with some education in occupational psychology and a desire to really immerse myself into that field as much as I possibly can. Many of you may be already in there, many of you may be studying, many of you may be doing something slightly different, but you're interested in it. Coaching, training, HR, L&D. It's such a wide range of things. I think it's really exciting to explore. So this is meeting number 2. If you are here from the first one, well done for coming back. I guess we did something right. Keep giving me some feedback so we can get some more on the go, and we can continue to evolve this session and make it as maximally practical and useful as many people as possible. I think what we'll do is we'll start off. Nikita, have you got those Menti slides ready?
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's get a little information off of you guys without you having to unmute and sort of talk over each other. What you can do is this rather cool thing called Menti. So if you go to menti.com and use that code, or Nikita, I think if you press the I button on your keyboard, it will also bring up a QR code.
Yeah, and I also pop the little chat box.
There you go, in the chat, copy and paste.
So in the chat, you can just click on this link, and then you'll be taken to Mentimeter. And if you can just type in, like, what would you like to explore today about having a second career in Occ Psych? So what's most salient at the top of your mind while you have a cup of tea and wearing your slippers? By the way, thank you everybody for posting the LinkedIns in the chat. At the end of the session, I'll show you how to download the chat. So then even after our call today, next time you have trouble sleeping, you can go back to this file and just add people on LinkedIn. Great. So let me just start. Over to you, Simon. What's standing out for you?
Hey, so we've got some good ones popping up. Different types of career options. How to get started as an independent practitioner. We've actually got, but before I start reading out some more, we've got some wonderful speakers today, which have been so kind in giving their time this evening. We have 2 Alisons, Alison Chevalier, I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. We have Alison Everest, and we have Pavneet Khurana as well, who are going to share their experiences, their journey, and tips, takeaways, learnings they've made, anything that they can contribute, and talking about their own journey. And I encourage you all, please, to pop into the chat function any questions and queries as you come along. After each chat, what we can do is have a little bit of a Q&A. And then I think it's really nice for us to break out into smaller groups as well. We can discuss takeaways that we've taken from each speaker, and what we could potentially use from that experience and that learning going forwards in ourselves, and how we can support each other in that sense. Lots of things coming up. How to get a job in the field at all. As someone who's studied since 2011, now doing a doctorate, I've been turned away 1,000 times, 10,000 times. Feel like I'm not going backwards, finding work experience. Okay, so I think a good start here would be, if you haven't heard of it, then the Psychology at Work.blog and also the hashtag on LinkedIn, Nikita, who actually runs this and posts job opportunities underneath that hashtag. Perhaps Nikita, you can give us a little intro on that.
Sure. So first of all, you're not alone with all of those concerns. We hear them again and again and again. So as Simon mentioned, we created a newsletter called Psych Talent, and I'll pop it in the chat. So we send out jobs every week. So we average about 50 to 70 OCPSYCH jobs a week. So, and they're mainly in UK, but there's also jobs in US, in India, Canada, Australia, Japan, basically anywhere we find them. And you subscribe to it, you get a letter, newsletter in your LinkedIn, and you can find it. Also with internships, do approach consultancies. I know Zircon is very good with internships and placements, so it might be worth reaching out to Amanda Potter. And we have a video of her on YouTube channel talking about what they do. And yeah, as far as salaries to expect from a recent graduate, it's very broad. It can range from 20 to 35K, but as a second careers, we appreciate that you might have more outgoings. So it's very difficult to get the first job, which pays well, but happy to discuss. The comment about being an independent practitioner, absolutely feel free to reach out. I've been independent for 4 years, best way to be as far as I'm concerned. But hey, I have an unemployable personality. If you've been turned away for 1,000th of time based on experience, I mean, if you feel comfortable with this, if you can maybe expand on it a little bit later, that'd be great to know. And yeah, anything else stands out for you, Simon, before we pass over to our first speaker?
Oh gosh, well, there's such a plethora of things. I think what would be good actually, Nikita, is for me to maybe have a browse through these later, and maybe I can address some of these. Go over to the Psychology at Work.blog, and perhaps I can put some blog articles together, or maybe some some answers to these questions, because I think you're not alone, absolutely not alone. And I too have many of these questions, but there are answers. Finding work experience, using, I think one of them popped out to me, like using your previous work experience and how not to lose that going forwards in when you change careers. You don't want to start from the bottom. But I think that's one of the beauties of OCPSYCH, is that your experience within the workplace is incredibly valuable.
Exactly.
If you've ever worked with people, or if you've ever worked for a company, or ever worked doing almost anything, you have some relevant experience, which I think is definitely something to take away. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Perfect. And if we move on then.
So would you like to move on to a different slide or the speaker?
Yeah, let's move on to the second slide.
So we have a few slides to choose from. So one of them, what industry are you in now? Just out of curiosity.
Out of curiosity.
Type it in.
To get an understanding of the breadth of industries and experience that's on this call right now. 56 people with probably around 56 different fields and experiences. Last time we had people from policing, dentistry, retail, just an absolute plethora of different things: education, interpreting, marketing, service delivery, HR, tech,
Neuroscience,
research.
studying and studying. Interesting. Biotech,
education, consulting. So an absolute plethora of different government. We've got here healthcare, recruitment. Each field, each job has come with an absolute wealth of experience that you can absolutely apply. And I think what I'll let people do now is to sort of perhaps expand on that from our speakers. Perhaps if I can call upon Alison Everest, perhaps to start us off. Are you there?
Yes, yep, I'm here. I've just unmuted. Yep.
Thank you so much. Perhaps if you could give us a little introduction of yourself, and then sort of delve into the details.
Okay, so I started off, I did an undergraduate degree in psychology and linguistics, and didn't go straight into psychology. I actually went and joined IBM and did a couple of years in marketing with them. And then I moved into finance, and I had a career in banking for about 15 years, based overseas. But all the while I retained my interest in psychology. So when I decided that I no longer wanted to work in finance, I decided to retrain and do my master's in business psychology. So my background really is finance. So now I'm just working as an independent consultant, using the business psychology with a number of small companies. I'm an associate for a number of companies, and I also do some work independently. What else do you need to know? Oh, you're on mute, Simon.
Apologies, yes. How did you go about making that shift, that move? What drove that decision, and then what were the steps that you took to go, from one to the other? And how did you go about that?
So I think when I was working in finance, I realized that I was finding the jobs that involved working with people much more interesting than working with the numbers. So I was gradually moving into more people-oriented roles. So I ended up doing leadership development, skills progression programs, working with some of the younger executives on career development issues. And then when I moved country and I could no longer do that sort of work, I did look at what else I could do with my time. So I moved into financial training. So developing and running training courses still in the sphere of finance. And I did a coaching qualification at the same time. And then I moved back to the UK, and I was finally in a position to actually think about doing a master's degree in psychology. So it was driven, I guess, by an underlying interest that I'd always had in people development, that had just kind of over the years got sort of more and more and more. But I had to wait until I was in a position to be able to do something about it and retrain, because I didn't think I could make the leap without a qualification. So it was quite important for me to do the master's. That's it.
Well, that's not it. I'm certain of it. So it would be good, I think, for myself and for many people to really solidify like the route that you've taken, because now you're a certified business psychologist. So you obviously had an interest in that coaching and that training side of things, and you decided to educate yourself in that field. But then after doing that, how exactly did you go about making those contacts, getting in touch with these people, and putting yourself into a position where you're able to call yourself that, or put yourself into a position where you're doing that work that you wanted to do?
I'm not going to lie, it was quite difficult, I have to say. So when I first finished my master's, I didn't really know what to do next. I really didn't know what to do next. I applied for loads of jobs that were, I guess, not appropriate. I went out to big companies because I'd come from a corporate background, and I thought maybe my corporate experience, my commercial experience would be kind of well regarded, but it wasn't. So, you're competing against people who've been in psychology right from the start, or people who've come up through the HR route and have that very people background, that very people-oriented background. So that wasn't working. I came across, through the university where I did my master's, I came across an internship, a paid internship, which I applied for in a small local company. And I had an interview with them, and it was a great interview and it went really well. And he didn't give me the internship, but he made me an associate, which actually was, better. It was much more appropriate. I was able to do work that used my experience and used my ability. I've dealt with clients at quite high levels in the corporate world, so I'm quite sort of, in face-to-face meetings, I'm able to hold my own, and I'm perhaps maybe older than some of the other people on this course, so I had a lot of commercial experience in dealing with clients. So he took me on, to do associate work as and when they had projects in sort of senior leadership development. And so that was a really good start, because that kind of gave me the confidence then to feel like, actually, yes, I can work in this space and that somebody will pay me to do that. And then, you know, a lot of the work I've had has actually been direct links from LinkedIn, where people have approached me. I've not been a great and not really good example of going out in there and marketing myself, but I've had people find me on LinkedIn, and I've had maybe 6 or 7 big pieces of work come to me through LinkedIn. And my LinkedIn profile isn't great, I'll have to admit that. So if you go and have a look at it, it's not a great example. But I think there's a combination of searches that people are doing around psychology, commercial experience. I have a lot of international experience. So it's that kind of, you know, putting everything down that you have that gives that complete picture of what you can bring over and above what somebody else would be able to bring. And, you know, trying to create that USP. So it was quite a slow start, and 1 or 2 of the jobs that I've done have been quite tedious and not well paid. But because this is a second career for me, I'm sort of in a position to be able to do that, which I think a lot of people aren't. You know, a lot of young people aren't. And you do it for the bread and butter, and then you try and find the other jobs that pay you better and are actually much more interesting, which I've found a few of those. And I've also been approached to do work that I guess I don't feel qualified to do. So maybe to create a course and deliver a course in a subject that I'm not perhaps 100% my background, but because I have the skills, I guess, to do the research and put something together, I've been able to get work that way as well. So people have been able to see beyond what's on my LinkedIn. So I think LinkedIn's really important. I feel LinkedIn is really important.
Yes, that absolutely seems to be a very common theme from session 1, and also what you've just been saying. LinkedIn is really the key to many opportunities. Yeah.
And I did right at the start, actually, when I was looking at doing my master's, I did go onto LinkedIn and I tried to find people who were doing jobs that I thought I would like to do, and sort of look at their experience and where they'd come from, and what their qualifications were, what their work experience was. And I actually phoned a number of them. I actually reached out and contacted a number of them and asked if I could have phone calls with them to talk through their career progress. Some people were helpful, some people were less so.
Sure.
But I would say the vast majority were helpful, actually. Would give you a half-hour conversation.
Yeah.
Which, you know, I was grateful for.
Did you, from those conversations, did they help shape the direction that you took and the actions that you took in reaching your goal?
Yeah, I think so, because my initial question really was around doing the master's, because I don't have the graduate basis for chartered membership at BPS, because my undergraduate degree wasn't sufficiently psychology, and that would have meant me doing 2 masters effectively, one to get the status and then one to get the occupational psychology. And I didn't really want to do that, so I ended up doing a business psychology master's, which still doesn't give me BPS accreditation, but it gives me ABP accreditation. And because I feel I have the practical background to go with it, I felt it was the right decision. I didn't want to take 2 years qualifying, doing 2 sets of qualifications. And I kind of wanted to be sure I was doing the right thing at that point. So I did speak to a lot of people about how much it was going to impact on me if I wasn't BPS accredited. And there is work that I can't do. There is work that I can't do because of that.
But it's not such a hampering for your career in general.
I think it depends what you're bringing with you already from your previous career. If I was 30, I'd do the BPS accredited route. I'm not. So, you know, it did inform my thinking, I guess.
Fantastic. And so going back to one of the posts that I saw on the previous slide, where people were asking and talking about what they were interested in learning. You're working, and you've been working for the past 5.5 years on a freelance basis. How did you find that transition into working for yourself? How did you go about that? And what have been the pitfalls and the learnings and the takeaways that you could share? Yeah,
I think, you know, when you work freelance, there are lots of pluses, but there are also the very obvious minuses, which is that flow of work and how you've got to continuously be generating that flow of work. And I would wouldn't want anybody to think I was full-time, you know, and that I was supporting myself full-time. At the moment, I go through phases where I'm very busy, and I've been busy since probably August, with probably 75% of my working hours taken up with work. But then I go through phases where, you know, there might be nothing for another month or so. So it's managing that flow, and it depends how much you need to manage it, how much you need for it to be a constant income for you. So, you know, if you work for yourself, you really have to manage that. And sometimes things fall in your lap, and other times you have to really go out there and try and make them happen. So that comes down to how you feel about doing that, how much you want to go out and sell yourself in the marketplace. And I go through phases where I really want to do that, and I send out, you know, 20 letters or however many letters, and, you know, nothing comes back. And then one day somebody contacts me on LinkedIn and says, are you interested in talking about this piece of work? And off we go again in another direction. So you have to be prepared to sort of take that roller coaster ride, I think, when you're a freelancer. It's difficult.
Yeah,
absolutely. And Alison, considering your journey was very interesting in the way you kind of skipped full-time employment, as far as I guess. So you kind of went through requalification stage, reached out for an internship, got an associate work, and that kind of helped you to build up your practice. And I'm just curious, if you had to do it all over again, what would you do differently now that you know what you know?
I'd probably do it when I was 30 and not 20 odd years later. I don't know. I think, you know, everybody's going to be different. I don't really want a full-time job for somebody else. Mm-hmm. You know, it's been a long while. Even when I finished working in finance in a corporate career, I then worked free. My training work was all freelance, and I did that on a consultancy basis. So I've been doing that for a long while now, and I don't think I want, every time I'm tempted and I have a look at the jobs out there, I don't think I want a full-time job for another company. I like the modus operandi that I have, but that's not going to suit everybody. So I wouldn't do anything differently. Nice. I'd probably try and have more realistic expectations. I did think I'd be able to reach out to some of the bigger companies and get something from them. And that's just not happened. So all the companies that I work as an associate for are all quite small companies. It's quite nice, actually. It's quite a nice relationship, and it works for them as well because they keep their costs down.
Absolutely, that's exactly what I did when becoming independent. I'm an associate with at least 3 or 4 companies, and this is one of the things that university doesn't always tell you. Probably most of the work, apart from the juggernauts like EY right now, that's hiring psychologists like there's no tomorrow, most work is done by small companies and associates. And therefore, having your level of expertise, the experiences, and what I was really encouraged by Alison is hearing that the company you applied for an internship saw the value in the experience you will bring in. And that's what's really key. Seek out people who will value this. Yeah.
Yeah, in fact, that happened to me twice. I applied for 2, the only 2 jobs I applied, full-time jobs. One was the internship, and another one was a full-time job. And in both cases, I ended up just working as an associate with them.
Exactly. And this is why, for example, just keep your options open, because sometimes you might not get the full-time job, but because of cost benefit analysis, etc., they might want to hire you as an associate to work with clients in that particular field you come from, because you can understand it like nobody else. You can understand it on a visceral level, which a fresh graduate has, I wouldn't say no clue. They can have an appreciation, hypothetical of it, but they have no real world experience that you might have decades of. And that's what's important to keep in mind. Plus, you can understand all the acronyms.
Absolutely. Alison, thank you so much. Let's just have a look into the chat to see if we've got some questions for Alison. Also, guys, if you feel like unmuting or popping your hand up, please do so if you have a question. Pavneet, we have a hand up.
I was waiting for you to say, can you put, anyone wants to put their hand up? I was waiting. A question for you, Alison. You mentioned there's work that I can't do without an accreditation. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, I guess it's just that some roles that you see advertised for business psychologists want you to have the graduate basis for the BPS. So when you see that, I can't apply for them. And I guess I know public sector, any public sector work, I think would look for that. You know, there are certain jobs that you see advertised or you know about that just say they want you to have that. Because I've seen a research post, and I'm quite interested in doing more research But a lot of research posts, you have to have that. So you're just automatically precluded. It doesn't matter what else you're bringing. So I think that is quite important for people starting out to know that.
Just a quick point. BPS just voted on, just voting on expanding their chartership criteria. So they would be more valuing, maybe not certified BPS degrees, your life experiences as well. There's been a short note on the psychologist. So yes, the rules currently are set, but keep watching the space because that might change depending on the vote.
We have a hand up from Alan, aka Mr. Brave.
Yeah, thanks very much. Hi, Alison. Thanks for sharing your experiences of career change. I've done a similar sort of thing, although not from finance, from engineering. Yeah, just interested. I must be doing LinkedIn really, really badly because I've had nothing through LinkedIn whatsoever, although I do value the idea of having a profile there. But I wondered, actually, has the work that's come to you through LinkedIn been from the finance sector, or has it come through, yeah, okay, a variety of sectors, yeah?
No, it's not been from the finance sector at all.
Okay.
One came from somebody who was looking for people with international experience. So one was around some work around cultural awareness. And because I'd had a career overseas, I think that sort of sifted me out of the pile. I'm trying to think of the others. No, and the others have been not related at all.
Yeah,
which is unusual. Yeah, it's unusual.
Yeah, that's interesting to hear you say that, because I sometimes wondered whether, you know, I'm carrying an old brand around with me. You know, so I spent a long time in the construction industry. So I wonder whether people who from the construction industry see me with a new title actually think, well, no, he was actually an engineer, not a business psychologist. So I just wondered whether that was an influence. But maybe I'm just awful at LinkedIn.
Well, I'm really not very good at it, I have to say. I'm not very good at it.
Well, just as a little pointer about LinkedIn, most business that I generated on LinkedIn was from a simple trick. And the trick is go to people who viewed your profile and message them. Because the amount of work I had from there is more than anything else. Because people go, oh, I was just popping by your profile. We might be interested in some leadership development. And I'm just like, why the hell you didn't message me? But they didn't. But there is a reason why somebody visited your profile, or if somebody sends you an invite, even if it's no text in it at all, just say, you know, what currently got your attention, etc. There's reasons why people visit your profile and want to connect with you. They might not express it, but it's really worth following up with them.
We have a hand up from Rachel.
Hi,
Rachel.
Hi, hi, Alison. I had a quick question because I've also just recently applied for an internship. I've only got around 3 or 4 years of experience, mostly in marketing, a little bit in HR. So I'm not sure if I could technically class myself as a career changer at this point. However, I was just quite interested in when you said that you applied for the internship program and then other jobs where they've actually just offered you sort of an associate role. Would you be able to share sort of what organisations they were and kind of a bit more on your experience in terms of getting through the process and I guess how it came about, those discussions around being an associate?
I think the first internship role I applied for, it was a company who I think, I'm based in Gloucestershire, so they had some tie-in or they had some connection with the University of Gloucestershire. And I saw it advertised and I applied to it. They do a lot of research. They do a lot of things around psychometrics. So I think they were looking for an intern to help with that side of things. So that was just a contact that I got through the university. The second company was a contact with a friend. A friend worked at the company and knew they were looking for more junior psychologists. But she thought they only wanted BPS accredited people, which I just kind of just applied anyhow. And then and they were in my local area. So in Gloucestershire, there aren't that many outfits. That's again, location is quite an important thing. Or well, it was until 2 years ago when everything got moved on to Teams and Zoom. So yes, they were just through contacts at the university, the 2 internships that I applied for. And I see lots of internships coming up on LinkedIn that Nikita keeps posting and sharing. I don't know how many of those are paid.
Much more now than they were before. That's the key thing. And there's also a lot more opportunities. Yeah. And but also, as Alison mentioned, just reach out to consultancies which you like the look of. Even if they're looking for roles like chief psychologist and you're looking for a senior psychologist, still reach out, because most consultancies still look for associates. And I think this is going to be more and more as bigger companies move into our space, like EY. Other companies will need to have a lot more manpower available to them in order to compete on bigger projects. So I think there's going to be more and more scope for associates.
Yeah. I think with the associate work, you have to accept that, you know, you are very expendable. So if they take you on, and you know, what does it mean to be an associate? It means that occasionally they give you work. It doesn't mean you're a member of their staff or that you're preferred. You know, they'll have a bank of associates that they can call on, some of which they'll use for certain jobs and some of which they'll use for other jobs. And you're only as good as the last job you did for them. You know, so you've got to really keep on top of, you know, how you work with people, I think.
I'll read out one more question that we've had in the chat function, and then what we can do is head into a breakout room. Quick question, can't use my mic at the moment, from Yasmin. Thanks, Yasmin. Do you think it's wise for a recent graduate to be selective when it comes to team culture when approaching a new role?
I'm not really sure what that means.
Yes, it means should you just take anything that comes along for the sake of getting experience and getting a toe in the door, or can you pick and choose? Would be my interpretation of that, Yasmin. Tell me if I'm wrong.
I think that's quite difficult, isn't it? I mean, I've certainly done some roles where I've not enjoyed it that much.
Sure.
But it's experience, it's contacts, it's a bit of money, and it might lead somewhere. You don't really want to get stuck somewhere like that. You want to be very aware, I guess, of what you're doing and why you're doing it.
Yeah.
So you make it work for yourself. You know.
Exactly. Keep your eyes open, but make it make it work for you.
Yeah.
We've got a hand up actually from Karina.
Hi, can you hear me? Can you see?
Yep.
Yeah.
It was just a quick one, just about the LinkedIn, really, because I've had quite a lot of years in marketing, like my profile and connections were all marketing. And how did you make that transition? Do you kind of have your OP work alongside as like an extra role, or did you create a new one, or did you gradually sort of phase one out to have a new one?
No, it's just all down there. I mean, as I say, my LinkedIn profile isn't particularly brilliant. It's just almost like a history book of what I've done and where I've worked and who I've worked for, with a load of kind of linked keywords in the top section. And I think what I've sorry.
No, that's what I was thinking. Shall I just do a bit in the top area and just say what I'd like to do more of?
Yeah, I think so. And also reach out to groups in those areas. So join all the different groups that are associated with the role that you want, and start connecting, following the conversations, connecting with the people who sound interesting, joining any free courses that are available, just so that you get that exposure.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great advice. Thank you so much, Alison. What I think we can do now is, if we head out into little breakout rooms for 10 minutes, consisting of 4 of us, where I think it's good to consolidate and to reflect upon everything that we've just heard and been talking about. And what are the takeaways that perhaps that you've interpreted and taken away from what Alison's just been saying? Before we hit the button on that, just a little round of applause, I think, for Alison. Let's see those hands.
Yay.
Thank you so much for your contribution. Hugely appreciated and very insightful, very, very interesting. Thank you.
Good, thank you.
Okay, meeting rooms are now open, and see you all in 10 minutes. So you should get a little invite. I'm just going to pause recording. All right, good people. So as we're going back here, how was the chat?
Good.
Anything particularly good about it?
Yeah, Karen's out here changing lives.
I was just telling about my masters. So the lady that I was talking to was quite keen, because she thought she had a not misconception, but she had an idea of what it was like at this particular college, and then I was able to say it wasn't quite like that, so she was a bit reassured. So yeah.
Excellent. It's also worth asking, not only if you're interested in a particular consultancy, to connect with people there, but also if you're interested in particular masters, just reaching out to students on LinkedIn and asking, how is it in this particular college? How is it working out? by the way, we're currently started getting a list of bursaries and scholarships for different MSCs and BSCs in psychology. So hopefully after we get a list, we'll share it around, so you know of other funding options, because it can get a bit expensive. So apart from discussing different colleges, what else was covered and what did you find useful or interesting in the breakout rooms?
Hi, so I found that some of the students, they are like studying and they're also working in the diversity inclusion. So that is very interesting to find, like you are still working on your studies and finding some of the job in that one. That is very interesting. So I found these ones, and like people have the like lot of experience, like 10 or 15 years experience in that one. So that is quite fascinating.
Absolutely. So it's just so much people bring to the table, and everybody's story is different.
Yeah, right.
So it's sometimes worth appreciating that as well. And where's the other Simon? Simon, are you here? I didn't, hopefully by mistake.
Oh,
Hey, Simon.
hi, Nikki. So I was just listening in closely. It's really been really great session so far.
Excellent. Thank you for positive reinforcement. And I'm sure that Simon, you also appreciate that as a master of ceremonies. So would you take us to the next bit?
Absolutely, absolutely. So my absolute pleasure to introduce our second speaker for the evening. Pavneet, tell us all about yourself. What are you doing right now? What are you working as? And then perhaps we can dial back and then you can run us through your own journey.
Thanks,
Okay.
Simon. I'm an organisational psychologist. I'm not chartered. I work with a small consultancy called Unleashed, and I will just pop the link in the chat, because we work with startups and scale-ups on all things people and culture, and I currently lead all of our inclusion work, but we only are about a team of 12, 13 at the moment, and you'll probably see by looking at our website that we've got this big bold statement, HR is dead, long live people, which can give you some insight into our approach and how we work. But the work that we do at the moment, as I said, working with startups and scale-ups, mostly tech businesses that are funded by venture capital, who are looking to grow very, very quickly. And so plugging ourselves in as people experts and ensuring that they're scalable, that they've got their foundations ready for scale, that they're able to define their culture, that they're able to hire for their growth goals. And a lot of that involves leadership coaching and working directly with teams on co-creating processes and practices. So we're not your typical consultancy. We definitely get deep into the culture of the businesses that we work with. So I work with, there's a couple of organizational psychologists within our team. We also have many coaches, and we also have a neuroscientist as well. So we all do the same work, but we all have come from different backgrounds in education and different work experiences too, all with a people lens though. So quite broadly, that's what I'm doing at the moment. A little bit about my background, would that be helpful, Simon?
Please, yes. Tell us about your journey. Where did you start off?
So I'm totally a career transitioner for sure. That's sort of why Simon has asked me to just share a bit about my experience today. My background is in marketing. I did an undergraduate psychology degree at Oxford Brookes, and fell into the world of marketing because it was fun, creative. I fell into the world of fashion, actually. It was very enticing to me at the time. And I contemplated doing a master's immediately after, but needed the cash, so needed to work. So was lucky enough to work with a few small businesses where I had exposure to all parts of marketing, from strategy, events, fashion week, customer acquisition, digital marketing. So it was all quite kind of all the things that you do in marketing ticking all those boxes. And because I was able to work in small businesses, I had that exposure. So managed to work my way up there quite quickly, which was a wonderful thing. And I really did enjoy that world. I enjoyed a bit of the lifestyle. I enjoyed the fashion weeks. I enjoyed the fun parties. I enjoyed the creativity of the work as well. And I, as I said, I was able to get such breadth of experience. And working with small businesses, none of those organizations had any kind of HR infrastructure. So it always fell to marketing to support employee engagement or internal comms, just because naturally the skill set often sits there. So without really having, the organizations not really having the language of HR or people and culture or engagement, but really understanding that there needs to be an enhancement of our productivity and efficiency, and leaning to marketing to sort of figure that out. So I managed to get exposure without really knowing that I was getting exposure into the people world as well, which was really wonderful. But there came a point where I was like, hold on, wasn't I meant to be some sort of psychologist many years ago? And I realized that my purpose at that time was selling really expensive clothes to people with lots of money. And I thought, no, this isn't for me anymore. So I left at the right time, actually. I kind of exhausted all the big projects that I was wanted to work on, and took a bit of a pivot. And I wasn't sure, I hadn't even heard of organizational psychology, occupational psychology at the time. So I went to work in a clinical practice, a private practice, working under clinical psychologists. I spent some time, I moved to Hong Kong to do a bit of a placement for a few weeks, supporting on psychoeducational assessments, group coaching for young adults, just really supporting all of the psychologists, taking quite a junior role. So taking a pay cut. Actually, no, I was doing an internship. I wasn't getting paid at the time. So taking a huge salary cut then, with going from a nice salary to nothing. And obviously you could only afford to do that for a short period of time. So I was supporting psychologists with assessments and group workshops, and learning loads about how to work in a clinical environment. And
before you continue, Pavneet, maybe I could ask you throughout this journey, because they're popping into my mind, how did you find that experience of getting that position in the first place? What were the questions that people were asking, and why do you think you were successful in that?
You mean moving into working in that clinical environment? Yeah, well, I wasn't in that place where I was like, there's so many different avenues for psychology. I don't really know which one is right for me. So I actually spoke to a few internship agencies in London. This was many years ago, and really explored what could I try that was working in the world of psychology. And so there were opportunities that were available. So it was working, the agencies connected small organizations to international candidates for internship, unpaid work. And so there were things like working in schools and nurseries, and that wasn't for me. There were things like working in businesses, but I didn't really understand that that was a path for me. And there was the opportunity to work in sort of clinical practice. And I thought, okay, well, yeah, this is probably the direction I'm going to go in. And because it was unpaid, they wanted resource, they wanted hands. So there was not really much of there was an interview, but there wasn't much more than an assessment. It was kind of like, is this person going to be able to do all the things that we need them to do from a junior level? Yeah, she's got years of marketing experience, of course she will. So that was kind of it, really. So took myself off there, and couldn't afford to work unpaid for very long, because it was a small practice. Sort of pitched a marketing plan to the owner and said, pay me to do all of this stuff that I'm really enjoying. Pay me to help you with your marketing, and I'll do your rebrand, and I'll bring you new customers. But also, while I do that, let me keep doing the assessments, and let me keep doing the workshops, and let me get really deeply involved with the psychologists. And so they said yes, but they paid me pennies, but enough to pay my rent at the time. So it was a big lifestyle change for me, and a new environment. But was lucky enough to, one of the questions that was asked in the mentee earlier was how to build a career without losing the value from my previous experience. And that's totally, I think, what I was able to leverage was, I've got all these skills. So how about I don't start from scratch, and I do all of this while I learn this stuff from you too. So it was sort of, I would say win-win, but I was not making any money, so but maybe not a win-win. Win-win when it comes from experience. But then some of the psychologists I was working with, I sort of turned them into mentors, and sort of tried to absorb as much knowledge as I could. And they actually introduced me to IO psychology. We're in Asia, so that was sort of the branding there. And I hadn't even heard of it. I didn't even know that that was a thing. I didn't even know that was an option for me. But they actually said that, you know, there's a really big demand for this, particularly businesses around here. They've got no idea. They would so value like blend of experience that you have with marketing as well as like training in psychology. And I thought, I don't want to work in that environment again. Like I thought I really like the clinical environment, but then managed to speak to, on LinkedIn, contacted anyone I could with the title of occupational psychologist, because I didn't really know what it meant, and just said, can I buy you a coffee with my pennies that I've got in my purse? And like now, you'd be surprised at how many people would want to talk about themselves. So it was not that easy for people to say, yeah, I'll give you half an hour if you buy me a coffee. And it just made me really consider the various different routes and the specialities. And one of the conversation that we just had in the breakout room, Yinka, you mentioned about wanting to understand your speciality. That was part of what I did, was explore the different routes. Some people working in well-being, some people working in selection and assessment, some people were working in performance and growth. And so I was like, do I like that environment? Do I like that environment? Does that suit my skills? Just to figure out what it was I wanted to do. And to be honest, I don't think I had a clear vision after all of those coffees about what it was, but it was, yeah, maybe this is the right path for me, because it will enable me to use and not lose all of that commercial experience that I've gained over the years through marketing. And so it was a bit of kind of coaching and probing from those people around me to say, this is the path, because it will be really lucrative in the future for you, and you get to apply all of these skills. And there's lots of clinical psychologists out there. There's not enough occupational psychologists. So that was sort of how I decided to then do a master's. So in the UK, I went to Birkbeck, did the evening course at Birkbeck. Well, it is an evening school, isn't it? I did the course at Birkbeck while working part-time to fund it. And yeah, it was amazing. I totally recommend Birkbeck. It was a really wonderful place to be, and the staff were really supportive of everyone in various different levels of experience. But how I got from there to now was a really messy ride, if I'm honest. It's actually only been a few years, 5 or 6 years since I retrained and requalified. And I applied to so many different roles with the title of psychologist, and obviously was getting rejected from all of them because I had a marketing background. And Simon, you did mention earlier, I jotted it down, if you worked anywhere, then you've had experience, but not everyone thinks that. That's not, like, it's not always the case in recruitment. We think that, but when people are with occupational psychology consultancies, they will look at me going, no, got different experience. And so I ended up, through these many coffees that I was buying, I ended up meeting someone who had an interest in shaking up the concept of recruitment, particularly for small businesses. And because that was my bag, also just to backtrack one step, all of the, particularly why I was getting rejected from all of those applications was because my experience is small business. I hadn't worked in large organizations. And typically what we see with an occupational psychologist role is with a large organization, with public sector organizations, and that wasn't a world I knew, and that was one of the reasons why people were saying you're not for us. So I ended up meeting this person who wanted to challenge the concept of recruitment. So started to build with him, which took a big risk. Started to build with him a subscription-based recruitment model for startups, so a culture-first approach to recruitment. And so taking away the negative stigma associated with recruitment on fee on success models, big fees associated with recruitment, and moving away from the more transactional approach into something more culture led. So it was, for me, it was an interesting place to be, because it was a a way in which I could test some of the stuff that I was learning within my course, but also apply a lot of the marketing knowledge that I have to employer branding. And so understanding, I didn't really know what employer branding was when I walked into it, but really deeply learned it very quickly, that a lot of the marketing skills really supported talent attraction, and using some of the skills I learned to develop assessments and to educate businesses on the importance of culture and developing culture assessments within businesses too, and using that to influence the hiring process. So it was very contained into sort of talent attraction and selection and assessment, but trying to find ways to create my blend of marketing, commercial, and trying a lot of these new skills that I was learning through the course. And also reinforcing my enjoyment for working with small businesses as well. So it was really hard because no one at the time knew what an occupational psychologist, organizational psychologist was, particularly in those environments, because as I said, typically it's the large organizations that feel as if they would gain value from that skill set. So educating the value of the skill set was really difficult. So that's why masking it in something like reframing it into people and culture, and to reframing it into employer branding was totally a way for me to be able to do the work try the work that I wanted to try, without necessarily scaring people off with the title of organizational psychologist, really. So yeah, that was sort of the entry point into the first what role of working in that environment.
Amazing. What a fantastic journey. Thank you so much, Pavneet. I'm also interested in some of the other experience that you've had. Tell us about being a co-founder of And For All.
So
it's okay.
The initial concept, the business I just mentioned here was called Create and Adapt, and that was where it got really tricky. So for about 3 years, I hit a really hard brick wall, had a really intense burnout, and had a really bad time with my co-founder. Turned into a really toxic environment, and actually feels quite vulnerable to talk about it right now. But
no problem. We can skip on from that.
No, actually, really useful to hear, actually, because that's when I walked away from that Create and Adapt and went freelance. And so similar to Alison's experience, actually, the networks that I was able to create were then I would go back and say, need some project work? Do you want me to help with your culture and your values? Can I do some leadership assessment work? Can I do some, not leadership assessment, sorry, leadership development work? Can I help host your offsite for you? Like that kind of thing. So for a year, I was then working as an independent consultant and doing more culture and values purpose driven work, which I really loved, but still within the same client base, was still within the same type of organization. And so being a co-founder was really hard because we scaled the business to about 25 people, so still really small. And that's when it got a bit tricky and I had to walk away. And so that was the best thing I did, was to be independent and sort of find my grounding again and choose the work that I wanted to do, because I was losing that love that I had for it at the beginning, which was being able to try and design and apply a lot of the psychology to the work. So when I went independent, I was able to do that again. And while I was independent, I started to freelance with Unleashed, the company I'm working with now. A couple of the freelance projects that we did were around doing organizational change projects when it came to culture and values, or
started off with Unleashed, working on a freelance basis with them on a couple of projects before working for them proper.
Yeah.
How did that process sort of start? Was that more of your proactivity, reaching out, saying, what have you got going on, I can help? Or was it sort of browsing job boards and seeing what you can do?
Yeah, that's a good question. So when building Create and Adapt, we were doing obviously a lot of marketing for ourselves, and we hosted an event series where we asked experts, founders of businesses, people experts, to talk about how to scale culture, how to build businesses through people, how to adapt how to again, taking the premise that I mentioned earlier around how to adapt the HR processes into very more people-centric processes. And that's when I met the founder of Unleashed, who we invited to speak at an event of ours, and we kept in touch a little bit afterwards. And then when I was freelancing, I then said, got any work, got anything going? And so she then we worked together on a particular project, and then which gave her the confidence to then give me a bit more work. And again, seeing the value of the networks that I was able to build through the years, even doing my master's, that's where I managed to get some of the other freelance work outside of Unleashed through that year. And then the pandemic hit. Yeah. And then a lot of the projects paused naturally. Even Unleashed as a business pivoted slightly during that time. But
where did it pivot to? How did you see that change?
Wow, it was really interesting. So one thing I didn't mention was that a lot of the work that we did at Create and Adapt and through my freelance work was around creating inclusive cultures, and how can we bring the concepts of inclusion and diversity into embed that into our organizational culture, and how it impacts behavior. And so luckily I was able to pivot more and move more into that work, and there was a big demand for Unleashed for that sort of work. No one in the team had the expertise at that time, and so it became a bit of a natural fit that they would call on me to field a lot of the sales calls that they were getting around that work. And then I applied for a full-time role, and here I am.
Wonderful. I'll before commenting, I will just ask, just admit someone's coming in a little bit late. Missed out on so much. If you have questions, please pop them into the chat, or please raise your hand. Pavneet is here to sort of share her wisdom and her experience. So please think about that as whilst I'm waffling on a little bit, and pop anything into the chat, and do raise your hand if you have questions. Or of course, just unmute and jump in. Go ahead. For me, a wonderful story. I think some of the key takeaways from an attitudinal perspective, and what's benefited you so nicely is your own, not just proactivity, but exploration of what it is that you want and what interests you. And I think that can't be overstated, you know. And it was from all of those coffees that you managed to arrange, to all of the those conversations you had around. I was intrigued when you said that you went to this an internship agency. I must admit, I'd never even heard of such a thing. And I was like, wow, okay, you know, it's wonderful and amazing, and you know, exploring yourself and your own, you know, desires, and what really floats your boat is surely the way to success. Because if you end up doing something that doesn't really do it for you, then you're gonna either be unhappy, or you're gonna have to sort of move the goalposts again. So you know, that level of research and development and work on finding out that, I think in the first place is a big takeaway for me. We have another Simon with his hand up. Welcome.
Thanks. Yeah, it's not so much of a question, but just more thank you. I think it was really nice to hear your story, and especially the vulnerability, not necessarily about the business and the toxic relationship, but also the journey that you went on. I think we can often forget to enjoy the journey, and like, it's, you know, there's a lot of people here, myself included, who are, you know, don't necessarily haven't found that end goal yet, but we should, you know, I don't think there really is an end goal, right? Like, there's always something else. So we should always just enjoy that and try and enjoy the space that we're in. And I think your story brought that to life really, really perfectly. So thanks for sharing it.
Oh, thank you, Simon. Yeah, when you think back, we always tend to think about the high moments or the positive moments, and those are the things that we think built us those successes. But yeah, you're right. When you do reflect on it, it is those hard moments that do really try and sort of prove that you do want to do something, or that they must be a part of your story. Yeah, and I personally often forget that. Thank you for reminding me, Simon.
We've got a question here from Laura Howard, and I think it doesn't necessarily have to be just directed at Pavneet. I mean, anyone on the call who has an opinion can answer this. Alison, of course, if you're still with us. But I am a solopreneur developing my own IO / psych consultancy, freelancing. What's the best advice you can give? Wow.
Well, for the many coffees is definitely good advice. But I also use Squarespace, or did I use Squarespace or Wix to build a website really quickly? Just build a sort of a homepage of a website which showcased what I wanted to do, not necessarily the things that I had done, but some of the stuff that I had done and I knew I had the strengths in, but also stuff that I wanted to do. So within my website, I had written workplace culture as sort of the bigger headline, which is definitely part of my experience, but then wanting to do more around some other bits and pieces, and actually using that as an anchor is really useful to have in conversations. So actually having that sort of creative brand for yourself has been really helpful for me, particularly because of the target audience I wanted to speak to, which were scale-ups who are quite naturally very influenced by how pretty things look. So that was necessary for me to get noticed and to sort of get myself above the competition, but also sending it around to people that, even if I didn't think that they would be leverage me directly, say, here's my website, what do you think? Here's my website, send it to everyone. Send my websites to everyone, which also is a vulnerable place to be, but that worked too, because friends of friends or contacts of contacts would be like, oh, my friend so-and-so starting this out, what do you think? Any feedback on her website? And then that would spark a, oh, interesting, I hadn't thought about doing that for my business, or something like that. Also getting involved in different networks. So I was lucky enough to be a part of a couple of founders networks, but also a couple of sort of women in tech networks as well. So leveraging on those networks and sharing, quite honestly, hey, I'm looking for some work, or I've got this really interesting idea that I'd like to prototype test on a group of people. I'm offering a subsidized rate. I did that at the start, saying, got this really cool concept for a program. Would anyone know who'd want to do it at half price to test it out with me? And that was really useful too. And Nikita telling me that I was underselling myself with my day rate, that was really useful. So really the psychology behind numbers for how you value yourself was really interesting. And Nikita said something interesting about find the sweet spot and how people see that day rate figure. Do they see you as undervaluing, or do they see you as too expensive? How do you meet their requirements by showing that you're confident, that you value and trust yourself to be able to do this work well without underselling yourself? So that was helpful advice. So definitely considering what that day rate looks like, or the project rate as well.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more with you, Pavneet, and I'm glad it was useful. So one thing I started doing now, which I didn't do before, is asking, what did you pay the previous person? What do you expect to pay for a workshop? What do you usually pay for coaching? And sometimes it can be just like really much higher than you'd usually charge. And you go, yeah, I'd be happy with this rate as well. Funny you should mention that. Or it can be much lower than you'd expect. And like, well, maybe we can do half a day for that rate. So there is that flexibility you can do.
Yeah,
but
definitely.
Charging yourself is one of the hardest things to do as an independent, I feel. You undercharge yourself. People might be like, what is this? You overcharge yourself. You don't get any work. So finding the market rate.
Yeah.
Just a quick note in the chat there, Pavneet. Alison Galley has asked if you wouldn't mind sharing the women in business groups that you're referring to, please.
Yes, I shall indeed. I'll find the link right now.
Wonderful, thank you. So before we move on, because it's 6:20 already, time's flying by, and we've got one more wonderful speaker. But let's have a round of applause for Pavneet. Let's see that. Thank you so much. Just really tremendous and inspirational story. Please do link up with Pavneet. I'm sure she has much to give. We're going to move on to our third and final speaker for the day, who's worked as a solicitor, as a lecturer at university law, and I will skip the middle because that is the gap that Alison's going to fill, but is now working as an associate director at What If Innovation. So I'll hand over to Alison Chevalier, if that's
that is
right.
Well done.
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope that you've been enjoying the session so far. It's yeah, it's been really very interesting and inspirational. Tell us about yourself, Alison.
Yeah, it's great to hear other people's journeys, and again, mine's very different as well. So I started off qualifying as a lawyer before, a little bit like Alison, realizing that I was much more into the people and the people development side than I ever was about the joy of the law itself. And I tried for a few years to make it work. I worked in law, I've worked in Japan, I've worked in London, I worked as an academic law lecturer, getting closer and closer to the, I guess, the education side. And then I paused and I had my children. And during the time in which I had, I think, 3 children, I saw an advert in my local newspaper for a master's in health and management psychology, which was at the local university. It sounded really interesting. I took some time to sort of work out whether I could accomplish this with 3 small children, and did it full time at the same time as having my kids. And it was really interesting. It capitalized on other things I was interested in. And I wasn't really earning at the time, or at least I was only earning at a very low level, doing the occasional visiting lecturing work as a lawyer. So I wasn't taking a career cut or a pause in my career. I was already off on maternity leave, and did this really interesting course. And then off of the back of that, I had a 4th child, by the way, while I was doing the course. So I've kind of, yeah, I know. So a little bit mad, but at the end of that, kind of just really reappraised, what do I want out of my career? Do I still want to be doing law? I don't love law. I found my degree in psychology, this master's in psychology, I did far more interesting. How can I begin to pivot the two? So I found a job back in law again, but managed to angle about 50% of my time being training lawyers in things, right? So going and doing a bit of compliance training, a little bit of behavioral training, the soft skills training, as they called it back then. And so it was a really slow start into actually using my psychology. It was very much, you know, I'm going in as a lawyer, I'm going in at a very sort of, you know, it was a full-time role, but it was still quite legally focused. But I was hired on the back of my legal skills, but they'd seen something in me about my sort of training background and thought, actually, this person might be really useful to help running some of our legal training. And then I'd been in that about 3 years for a local company, but it was a global company, but local to my home. And I saw this advert for the BBC, and the BBC were looking for a lawyer who would run their legal learning and development. And I applied for this role, and I just thought, this is actually the role that's written for me. You know, I've got all the training and development exercise. I'm also a lawyer. This is something I can do. Couldn't wait to work for the BBC. Thought that sounded like an amazing experience. So went into London, did the commute into London full time for 3 years doing this role, and set up their kind of learning and development strategy. And again, it was a learning rather than a psychology that was the stuff I was drawing on. I mean, you draw on psychology, but I wasn't there as a psychologist, I was using it. From there, saw a role with Accenture, so a big global technology company, who were looking for somebody to set up legal and knowledge management strategy for their global teams. So I went across to Accenture, worked virtually for about 3,500 lawyers, contract managers. Again, not really psychology as such, but again, lots and lots of drawing upon my knowledge to design leadership courses, to design interventions, to set up a coaching program, to set up a resilience strategy. So all of those things I did drawing upon my psychology knowledge. And I stayed there for about 3 years. And then there was a job that came up for YSC Consulting. I don't know how many of you have come across them, but they're a boutique leadership consultancy who do lots and lots of psych assessments on senior leaders at the sort of C-suite. And again, thought this would be really interesting, flex my psychology muscle. So I went off and did that for a while. And that was consulting. And it was hard. And consulting is hard because you're having to do the work. You are at the mercy of what the client wants. And also you're having to sell and win new business, because that's what they're paying for you for, is to bring new business into the company. So I had very, very punchy delivery targets and sales targets, but really enjoyed it and enjoyed doing deep leadership assessments. And these were 4-hour assessments where I would sit with someone in a room and I would unpick, you know, what happened in your childhood. Let's look at some psychometrics. What does this say about you? How might you be a good fit for the role that you're being recruited for? And then I would write up an assessment on the back of that and sometimes sell in some coaching on the back of that. And those reports would then get sent to the company. The company would decide, how do we develop this person? Is this the right person for the role that we're recruiting for, we're about to promote? And I did that for a while. And my learning really from that was, I like psychology. I love it in the context of strategy, learning, development, but I don't want to be a psychologist and just do psychology. I didn't want to just do assessment all the time. And I think that's been a real key learning for me, is for me, being a psychologist is about how I leverage my psychological knowledge, not about being chartered or having to be a psychologist in the room. So I then went to AstraZeneca. I jumped around lots in my career, and I got hired as their director for emerging talent strategy. So I'm passionate around young people. I've got teenagers myself, I've got 2 children at university now. And this was all about using my learning development knowledge to set up a learning development strategy, talent management strategy for emerging leaders, people who are grads, people who are apprentices, people who are PhD students, people at the beginnings of their career. How do you begin to get those people, how do you shape their potential? How do you recruit for the right for the right characteristics and strengths that are going to make you successful? How do you nourish those people's development? How do you take those people forward and recognize their potential in the business? So that was my strategy and my remit on a global scale across AstraZeneca, which was really interesting because I was doing that at the time of the pandemic. And then I've moved again. So I've moved recently back in November to What If Innovation. So What If Innovation are a boutique innovation consulting who've been bought by Accenture. So we're actually part of Accenture again. So I've come back to Accenture. And they're really interesting. So there's 2 parts of the business. So part of the business does innovation and sort of new product innovation incubation. But the other part of the business that I work in is called growth, radically human cultures or growth cultures. And we look at companies who are either in the process of change or growth and thinking about, okay, well, how do we unlock the values that are written on your door? How do we get people to experiment around behaving differently? Because actually it's behavioral change that's going to drive your culture, right? So if someone says we're not an agile organization, how can you begin to experiment to get people to do micro things that are going to make them more agile? And that, even today, right before I joined this call, I've been thinking all day about, right, what kind of experiments would we do on people to get them to be more agile, feel more empowered, feel more psychologically safe? How can we do that? So I'm doing that with a variety of clients. I'm on a huge project at the moment with a big client who are looking to really grow and shift and transform in the context of sort of this VUCA environment we find ourselves in. So I draw on my psychology knowledge all the time to be able to do that. And that's everything from coaching, sometimes coaching people, small C coaching, big C coaching. It might be designing leadership programs. It might be defining behavioral interventions. And so a few things about me. So I like doing that in the strategic, big picture learning and development space, rather than being a psychologist, just focus on one thing. I enjoy coaching, but I don't want to make it my everyday role. And I am a single parent with 4 children. And so I have never gone down the solo consulting route. I like the security of working for a big company with secure paychecks and benefits and all the things that come with that, and not having to market and spend time sort of thinking where my clients are going to come from. And that's just a personal choice and where I am with my life and my career. And I wouldn't rule it out, but I like the security of big companies, and also the collaboration that comes from working with really bright colleagues across boundaries, sometimes getting sent off internationally to work in exciting places. So I've done a lot of work in the States and Japan and been able to travel with my job. So I really love what I do. And I think it's a really good illustration of how you can use psychology in so many different companies and so many different careers without having to necessarily be chartered or call yourself a psychologist. You could just draw upon that. So I'll stop and take questions.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you summarized what was going on in my head perfectly at the end there, how you can draw upon that education, that knowledge. can apply it in such a variety of ways. And the other thing I think perhaps which sort of stuck out for me is how this has all come about really from your own proactivity in crafting your role back when you weren't enjoying what you were doing.
Yeah.
And you were like, let me just craft it in this direction, and then it's mushroomed from there. And I think that's a very valuable takeaway, I think, for me. But yes, let's open it up to cute questions, guys. Pop them in the chat, or of course unmute yourself or pop your hand up.
We've stunned them all into silence.
Yeah, maybe an hour and a half of talking about it. We got something from Rachel. Hi, Rachel. Hi again.
Hi, I had a quick question, Alison. How has it been different working at I think I'm looking to take a similar route to yourself in terms of a steady paycheck and working at different organisations. How has it been sort of different like cultures, AstraZeneca versus Accenture, for example?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, it's difficult to say that one. I mean, so I'd say large organizations, there is a culture of cultures, right? So I'll take AstraZeneca. You've got operations, you've got sales, you've got R&D, you've got different parts of R&D, and each of those has a subculture, and each team within that has a subculture. And so sometimes it's difficult to define from the outside, this organization has this type of culture. I would say Accenture particularly is a very always on, high performance culture. We're all chargeable, we're all accountable, we all write timesheets, we have to sort of be, you know, the real sort of expectation around delivery. And I certainly don't turn off my laptop at 6 o'clock every night. I'm always kind of on. You know, I think everyone's comfortable with different things, right? So for me, the BBC, which was lovely, wasn't sort of fast enough. It wasn't something that I felt right. I was closely aligned to. I think you've got to know yourself quite well. Public sector, for someone who's quite sort of go, let's innovate, let's think at scale. Sometimes that's not the best fit for you. Equally, you know, sometimes if you work in a real sort of hard American consultancy, you can feel maybe a little bit of lack of purpose in your role, and you need to go in and find the purpose in your role, the personal thing that keeps you going. I'd say big companies are less of a risk with culture than very small companies is the other thing I'd say. I've worked for both, and my own preference, and it is purely a preference, is I like bigger organizations because generally speaking, it's not a culture dictated by one or two leaders at the top. There's a framework, there's a culture, there's more space to grow and move within the organization. So those are my reflections, I guess.
Yeah, tremendous. I think perhaps a reflection on what all three speakers have really talked about, and the variety that they've shown in their careers and their interests, and I think it's a really good reflection on the field itself. And you know, it's not, as I said at the beginning, and I think as it's been kind of reiterated, there's not a straight line, it's not a straight arrow. It's a tree with a million branches, and you can draw upon that knowledge to apply it in a variety of different ways. And you don't need to, as Alison said, call yourself a psychologist, but you can utilize it in such a variety of ways. I don't know if anyone else has any reflections. Don't have to be any questions or queries, but reflections on what that means for them, or anything that they've experienced. You're very welcome to contribute. If not, what we can do is, I think perhaps Rachel, did you pop your hand up?
Yeah, so just a quick one on your role in the emerging talent strategy space. You kind of talked about, so I've applied for a secondment at my current company in the emerging talent team, but more in the recruitment space. You kind of talked about sort of more like the end-to-end journey rather than just recruitment. You sounded like you were more involved in the strategy of building potential and making sure that the opportunities were there to grow these potential future leaders of the company, I assume. It'd be good to hear a bit more about that in terms of like how you applied your psychology.
It's a great question, and I worked hand in glove. So my strategy was all encompassing. It was everything from looking at like what we do, all the way from sort of outreach, right, at schools, all the way through to how do we grow these people into future leaders. But I wasn't directly in charge of talent acquisition, but I partnered really closely with them. So it was like sitting with them going, okay, if the end goal is we want people who have got really high critical thinking skills, then how do we go and recruit for that, right? What sort of tests might we be getting into the culture? How might we recruit for the kind of skills we're looking for? If we're looking for more diversity in the organization, how do we go about achieving that? Both through acquisition, but also how do we nurture, how do we make the environment more inclusive? And so there's a real partnership going on. And actually, you know, for those of you who are thinking actually talent acquisition might be a route into this, because it is, right? You get to do loads of interesting things in talent acquisition, and you feel you might be pigeonholed. If you join a big organization, there's always lateral moves you can make. I mean, that's my learning, is that you can join one part of the company, you get a bit of experience somewhere, and you can leverage that. So loads of people in talent and development where I was sitting had come through the talent acquisition route. So don't discount that at all, because it's a really good training ground for your ability to screen, have conversations with people, learn from people. So I think it's great learning. If you can get into that space as well, it's so interesting, because, you know, like early talent strategy is like, these are people at the beginnings of their career. So you really have got the opportunity to start thinking about how you engage with strengths, for example. How do you leverage people in how do you do nice assessments to make people feel engaged as part of the company? So I think it's a great place to breed your career in the psychology, HR related field. The other thing I'd say is, so I have got an HR qualification. I'm CIPD qualified, but I didn't go on a course to do that. So I worked for several years, and then you can do an accreditation based on your experience. So you fill in an assessment, you have a few interviews, they assess your experience, and then you can get your accreditation that way. So don't feel always that the route to qualification needs to be something about you taking another year out of your career and go and do it. There are other ways of getting your experience recognized by, if that qualification is important to you. I've never once been asked or recruited for where someone's saying, show me that you're a qualified organizational psychologist, or are you chartered? It's never been a barrier to any of the roles I've had, because I think, yeah, actually it's your experience mostly once you're on the ground that matters most, and what you can speak to. And that's what I look for when I interview people. Does that help?
Yeah, it was really interesting. Thank you. I think the organisation I work for, there's definitely a divide between talent acquisition and talent development. So hopefully that's an interesting lens I can bring. So thank you very much.
Alison, how useful and relevant have you found that CIPD accreditation?
It's hard to say, isn't it? Because it's there on my CV and it's there on my LinkedIn profile. And I found it interesting to do it. I don't know that I learned anything through it, because it was really assessing more what I already did. But yeah, I mean, sometimes, or I'll be frank, I mean, sometimes you do see jobs advertised and they say, you know, must be CIPD. Right. You know, the degree to which it's relevant, or you specifically draw them in it, it's questionable. And I think, and I would say of the two qualifications I had, so the psychology, or because I remember making that decision, like, which one do I go and do? Do I go and do my CIPD masters, or do I go and do psychology? And I think I asked someone on LinkedIn that, and they said, A, don't worry about chartership if you're going to be working in companies. It's just like, that's not necessary. And B, don't worry about, you know, don't worry with the CIPD thing, because actually everything you need to learn about the CIPD stuff, 90% of it, unless you want to do hard HR like employee reward and remuneration and processes, if you want to work on the talent side, the psychology side is the more valuable thing for you in terms of your understanding. Does that help?
Yeah, very much so. Interesting. I wonder if any of our other speakers this evening have dabbled in that CIPD side of things, and your experiences around that.
I personally haven't, but a few of my colleagues have. And I really agree with what you were saying, Alison, that you don't have to call yourself a psychologist to actually do the good work and have the good impact. And so it's really interesting to just have that reflected back, actually, which is really nice. But in honesty, if I can speak for some of my colleagues who are very open about CIPD, that some people really enjoy it and really value the accreditation at the end of it. Some people said that they didn't gain anything from it and it hasn't helped them, and they wish they invested their time in something else. So it is really depending on what it is that you think it's you want it to do
Yeah.
for you, and making that right choice. Again, some people have chosen to do CIPD over doing an OCPSych master's course, and the other way around. So I wouldn't say that they're totally interchangeable with one another at all, but it really just depends. It depends.
I agree. HR is a huge field, right? So talent very much linked to the psychology side of it. If you're going to be working in the kind of the reward and recognition space, or the employee performance stuff, there's probably a lot more where, and don't get me wrong, I am regularly on the CIPD website, and I find their resources really useful. So there's always stuff that's useful there, and they run some really interesting things about like org design, which I think isn't necessarily something you might do otherwise. So I mean, definitely do go and have a look and see which is the best fit for you and the career path you want to take.
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely a takeaway. I think a very powerful and key takeaways is really about exploring, exploration of not just what's out there and what's available and how to go about it, but what is it that really does it for you. So you can make those right decisions after you've gathered that information. Sounds like a very empirical approach, doesn't it?
Yeah. I'd say one more thing, Simon. I'd say really know yourself, right, in terms of your psychology. So as I said before, test and fail. So I've done lots of different careers and different aspects of psychology, and I've worked out that for me personally, sitting in a room doing lots and lots of deep psychological assessments, it's not my favorite part of what I do. I like the big strategic stuff and the kind of how do you use psychology in learning and talent. But for other people, that they might get a lot of joy. And I see lots of my colleagues who really love this stuff, where you get in a room with a client in 4 hours and you do an assessment on them and you really get deep under the skin of that person. If that's your thing, go and do that in a consultancy where you can get to do a lot of that boutique assessment work. But if it's not, and if you're more big picture, maybe think about where it is you want to land with your psychology career.
Yeah, absolutely. Wise words indeed. Well, what we can do now, I think, is if Nikita is there and he can share the screen. Yeah, that's it. What would be your key takeaways? We're gonna head back. If you've still got that tab open on your browser, hopefully, or if you went onto your phone, you should be able to see this slide. You can contribute. What would be your key takeaways from today? It'd be really good to understand that and to hear. Give you a bit of time to navigate and then have a bit of typing. How there are lots of different career options, small businesses, large businesses, consulting, reaching out to people, leveraging your own unique experience. Proactive approach, never stop connecting, knowing your strengths and interest areas, resilience and persistence. Yeah, utilizing strengths and past experiences. Something that I mentioned in our breakout room the first time to just my little group. I'm not sure if it's still there, but maybe someone amongst the group here can correct me if it's not. But on the BPS site, there used to be a very large list of psychologists, very large. And after I graduated my undergrad 20 years ago now, I decided that I wanted to do something practical with my learning instead of going on to a master's immediately. So I just spammed them. I sent emails and letters out to all of them that I could find, basically. And I did get a response from someone, actually, a clinical at the Maudsley Hospital. And we went and had a coffee together. And from that, there started a project that we started off together. And I was an honorary assistant psychologist at the Maudsley Hospital for a short time, just off the back of going through this list on the BPS website and just being a complete nuisance. And I ended up just writing a small article, and it was published in a not in a big journal, but it was published as a newsletter as part of something else. I can't even remember what it was now, but it was a fantastic experience. So, you know, utilize resources such as this. And LinkedIn we've already talked about, but I think that's quite a useful thing. Enjoying the journey, self-confidence of the speakers, indeed. Well, the fact that they agreed to speak in the first place. Great kudos. Oh, we never gave a round of applause to our last Alison. Let's do that silently whilst we're on mute. Thank you so much.
So it's Simon, I love the comment about self-confidence, right? So I just want to remind people, back in 2011 I was still pretty much at home with 4 children and didn't have the confidence I do now. A lot of if you're perceiving confidence in me, it comes from having worked, not because I had it necessarily going in. So don't feel, oh, I'm not confident enough to apply for things. I would say to you, just actually, it's okay to feel that you're just going to learn and grow. That's completely normal. Don't sort of rule yourself out of things because you think you're not confident enough to apply.
Yeah, good advice.
I kind of second that, Alison. I could just come in and say when opportunities come your way and you don't think you're 100% qualified for them, don't just discount them. Yeah. Think, you know, what can I bring to that? And I've always been really honest with people who've offered me work when I haven't felt I necessarily have the full skill set. I've had an honest conversation and said, but I can do this. Yeah, I can bring this to it. And just put yourself forward for those opportunities. And it does mean stepping out of your comfort zone. But then, you know, the upside is you gain new skills and you grow as an individual.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Wonderful. How to start and make the leap. And then I think a good question that we can finish off today's session with, because I think it's time for a cup of tea, is to explore about what perhaps you might be interested to hear about next. What items and topics of conversation would you like to be explored on a further future session?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So anything in particular you might think would be of particular value to you, be it about second career in Psych or education in Psych, or, you know, LinkedIn or business development, could be just anything that kind of makes you want to come to another Zoom call. How do people do it? So yeah, specific examples. Absolutely, maybe some case studies. How to work out price points. Utilizing LinkedIn pricing. Second one. Link to the last session, so it's coming up online. So both of the sessions were recorded and they're going to go up to our YouTube channel. So do check out our YouTube channel, psychologyatwork.blog, and please subscribe. And because there's all sorts of goodies there. But yeah, so business development, building consultancy, why people motivate to pay you money to do this job. Business plans, navigating BPS. Yeah, well, we have good people who know how to do that, like David Biggs. Marketing for bashful psychologists. Can just somebody unmute themselves and say, what do they consider to be a bashful psychologist? I'm just really curious to finish the evening con.
Yeah, thanks, Nikita. That was me. Yeah, it's not my strong point. I've worked in business development for a long time for major construction companies, and I came up with a phrase that I'm fantastic at selling other people, but I'm crap at selling myself. So I think maybe a lot of people go through it. Really, it really is that kind of you know, capturing what it is you do, and then how you put that to people as well, and where you put that to people. I think it's something about channels, so it's not just the bashful bit, but as I articulated earlier, LinkedIn hasn't really done much for me, but actually I do more in sort of point-to-point contact with people. You know, it'd be interesting to hear what other channels people have found useful. and getting work.
Absolutely. So it's more about the kind of the nitty-gritty of running an independent business. By the looks of it, a lot of these comments are about. So would, let's say, an event in a month's time or so, and please check out LinkedIn, on actually how to run a business as an independent consultant would be useful. Pavneet is nodding. That's a sample size of 1 out of 37.
We've got another yes from Liz.
Another yes from Liz.
Make that 3.
Yeah,
3.
and another one. I reckon that's a yes. Let's go.
Great. So, and the key thing was independence. Yeah, and just how to run it, experiences, tips, what we wish we would do differently, how to make most of LinkedIn, branding, and all of that. So, on this note, Simon, would you like to close us off?
Well, yes, I think this is a good time for us to say goodnight. It's been such a fascinating and insightful session. I think a huge thanks to our 3 speakers who have shared such different journeys and different experiences and different roles, and but that level of engagement, that drive, I think it's really palpable through the screen. It is, at least for me, and that level of enthusiasm, I think, really shines through, and I find it inspiring myself, and I hope that everyone else here on the call has also found it very interesting and inspiring as well. So thank you very much to all of the attendees for coming here and sharing your own queries, questions, and being interested, and thank you for those who spoke today.
Excellent. And I think I very much echo that. Thank you to all the wonderful speakers and participants. And I would just like to, let's give a round of applause for Simon, who's done a fantastic job being the host today.
Well done, Simon.
Oh, bless you. Thanks.
And organizing everything as well. So thank you very much, Simon. And
all over LinkedIn.
Mentioned the YouTube video will be up in the next couple of weeks, so check out the space. We'll host an event about running independent businesses probably towards middle to end of May. So if you don't see anything on LinkedIn in a couple of weeks, do drop us a line and we'll send it across to you. And thank you everybody for coming so much.
Have a nice evening, everybody.
All the best. Bye.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Thank you, everybody.